So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you, and thanks for leading us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Denton. So now we're going to ask the two panelists to introduce each other. I don't know this, but yeah, we're going to ask you guys to introduce each other. So Governor Haslam, why don't you go first?
Sure. It's really fun for me to be a part of this. I've been a fan of Trinity. Chip, I've known Chip for 50 years, so it's fun for me to be a part of this. But it's really particularly enjoyable to have Michael Ware with us. Michael and I met about 4 years ago right now when we did a similar type program for the church that I was going to at the time in Nashville. And our pastor, Scott Sauls, knew Michael and asked if I would do this. And I just really enjoyed being with him. And since that time, we've had several occasions to be together. But here's what you should know about Michael. He became one of the youngest White House staffers ever during President Obama's first term. And then he went on during President Obama's reelection in 2012 to lead faith outreach. And he did a very effective job there. And then he won't tell you this, but I will, because I've actually been around President Obama when I've heard him quote things that Michael said. And Michael wasn't ever certain like whether he was getting through, but I know that to be true. Michael is also the author of a book called Reclaiming Hope. It's about the future of faith in America and lessons that he learned in the Obama White House. And then he and Justin Giboney have written a book called Compassion and Conviction. And while I'm on the blurb, I don't push a lot of people's podcasts, but one I do is one that Justin and Michael do together called Church Politics. It is excellent. And like I said, our politics aren't the exact same, but there's very little that he says that I disagree with, mainly because of the theological conviction they bring to the argument. So the recent book is Compassion and Conviction. I recommend it. And then their podcast is Church Politics. So really glad to have Michael with us, and sorry we can't be live. The last thing I'd say about this is you'll learn this about Michael. He's always on the edge of smiling. One of the reasons that you like him is he's just about to break out in laughter. And if you're like me and you're tired of people, particularly believers in politics, who are so dour that you hope you never get trapped in an airplane seat next to them, Michael is the antidote to that.
Well, thank you. It's such an honor to be here, and I've been looking forward to this event for a long time, especially to be with someone who's become a friend. Governor Haslam was sworn in as governor of Tennessee in 2011, was reelected in 2014, and is one of the leading statesmen of recent Tennessee history. He follows a long line: Bill Frist, Baker, Phil Bredesen, folks who were respected on both sides of the aisle. He did a lot of work to rein in the state budget, advanced an education program called Tennessee Promise. And education has been such a highlight of Governor Haslam's time in public life, both in his time as governor, but also as mayor of his hometown, where he was born and raised in Knoxville. He served as mayor in Knoxville, which I know he's proud of. And he was elected there in 2003 and reelected in 2007. Hopefully we'll be able to talk a bit more about sort of decision-making at the level at which Governor Haslam operated. So I won't go through all of his record here. I will say he brought to the job the experiences of a businessman, someone who knows what it's like to balance the budget of a business, someone who was with a company for a long time and saw its growth from 800 employees and oversaw its growth from 800 employees to 14,000 employees. And he also brings the experience of someone who's faced tragedy, faced real life, and he brings that to his role. I think the people of Tennessee recognize that this was a man who was not sort of in office for his own ego. He was in office to serve the public. Then one of the last things I'll say is Governor Haslam's great. His wife Chrissy is unbelievable, and together they have 3 children. And Chrissy, former First Lady, maybe we'll talk about this a bit. They did more to reach out to the faith community of Tennessee than any governor that I know of in any state around the country. And what's important about the outreach that Bill and Chrissy did, in my view, and this is something I had in mind with the role I had, was they weren't just reaching out to political power brokers. They were actually interested in reaching out and getting to know people of faith who were actually, and religious leaders who were actually serving people, who weren't looking for a political acclaim. And that means such a great deal when we could tell a story about faith in this country that isn't about sort of acquisition of power, but is about service. Governor Haslam lived that out. He also helped to lift up religious leaders who were doing the same. And so there's so much more to say. I'll just close by saying, if folks are watching this looking for a steel cage match for a big, you're just not going to find. I love this man. He's been someone who's been important in my life, and we've been able to consult each other on things, mostly me consulting him. And I'm just so glad to, especially just a couple of weeks out from an election, be able to talk with a friend and be with the community here at Trinity. So thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to start with some general questions, and we're going to ask that both of you answer each question. So the first question that we have, and either of you can answer first if you want, it's just, why do you believe it's important for Christians to engage in politics?
All right, Michael, why don't we take turns? I'll go first on this one, you can the next. You know, Alyssa, great question. Couple things. We start with a God who does care about what we call the common good. He says it sends his rain on the just and the unjust, the sun to shine on the good and the evil. It also says, you know, for God so loved the world. And then, you know, Jeremiah talks about telling us to seek the peace of the city to where we've been called. And the reality is, while, you know, I believe as a conservative Republican government has its limitations, it also, though, is an incredible chance to leverage impact. I don't think I'll ever have a job like I did as governor where you can leverage impact that much. It affects people's lives in such a big way. And so it really is an incredible way to serve. And I hope in the current, everything that comes with the current political contentiousness, that Christians aren't just throwing up their hands and saying, pox on both houses, I'm out of here. Because that's the wrong response to where we are today. Michael?
Yeah, so as Christians in this country, we do not choose to have political influence. We have it by the very nature of being citizens. The choice that we have as Christians and as citizens is how we steward that influence. And so Christians care about politics. We talk about politics, we think about politics, because politics and political decisions greatly impact the well-being of our neighbors. And we know that we're called to love our neighbors. And to love simply means to will their good. And so when we enter politics, we're thinking, how can we, through our actions, will the good of our neighbors in this area that is not the only area of life which affects the well-being of our neighbors, but it is an essential one. And so politics is an area where we can advance justice and affirm the dignity of the human person. And so that's why we care about politics. Now, I'll note there are, that's not the only reason why people are going to politics today, though. And so we need to be very careful that we're going to politics as Christians for the right reasons. C.S. Lewis has this quote that he talks about this fact that it is okay for a sick man to talk much about his digestion, but if he thinks about it all the time, if it becomes the natural food of the mind, then what has been undertaken for the sake of health has become itself a new and deadly disease. And when he's talking about that, he's saying that that's what politics has become. That we've taken up politics not to fix some problems, not to take care of limited ends, but we've taken up politics to fill this place in our hearts and our lives that politics really doesn't deserve to take up.
All right, so our next question is, what role does the media play in our perception of parties and their policies? And Mr. Weir, you can go first on this one.
I mean, there are a lot of ways to take on this question, but it's a good opportunity to maybe talk about political parties because the media plays into this. When we talk about political parties today, it's often as though they're an identity marker. That it's a team you're on. You say I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, and that's like all folks need to know, right? But that's not what political parties are for. Political parties are vehicles to mediate actually conflicting opinion. When you go to and I think at least one of you is registered. I don't know if both of you are 18, but I think one of you at least is registered. When you went to register to vote, and there was no fine print on the bottom of the registration that says, I hereby sign over my conscience to every jot and tittle of my party platform. We should be going to politics to influence the party. We should believe, we should belong to a party because we believe things. We should not believe things because we belong to a party. Now, when you get to media is all about trumping up the party brand and leading people to sort of attach their identity to parties. And it kind of works in everybody's interest in terms of political actors. The party loves it if you'll willfully follow them along with whatever political position they have to take. That makes it really easy for them to, a term we use is sort of instill party discipline, right? You just keep everybody in line. And if everybody's loyal to the party and not to their own convictions, it makes it really easy to organize things. And I'll just say quickly, like we see this in politics quite often. Republican elected official can support a policy and Republican voters will support it. If the same policy is supported by a Democrat, Republican support for that same policy will drop and Democratic support will skyrocket. And so we need to be really careful about how we're thinking about party and how we're allowing the media to inform our conception of ourselves and how we think about our politics.
Yeah, and Michael did a great summary, so I won't go back over that. But the other thing to remember is this. What's changed so much today from when Dr. Denton and I were your all's age is there's so many more ways to get your news. And because of that, then you can go pick the news source that you like anywhere on the whole spectrum from far right to far left. You pick the one you like, and then, by the way, then your phone feeds you more of that type of news because you've clicked on that. And all of a sudden, and by the way, we like hearing news that confirms what we already believe. Confirmation bias is a real thing. So I choose the news I like, and then it sends me more of that because I like it. And then that just tells me I'm right. And then I think also everybody else thinks just like I do too, except for a few nuts on the other side. And so what it does, Sam, it exacerbates that political divide. The real truth is there's a lot more agreement among people on a lot of issues than you might think. Yeah. But the media has made it that way. The other thing, and I say this as somebody, I don't say this as an anti-capitalist at all, but you have to remember the news is a business too. Okay, CNN now is all over President Trump's case all the time. But if you go back to the 2016 Republican primary, remember there were like 17 Republican primary candidates all across the states. The minute it was over, they let Trump go on air first, okay, which is a huge advantage because then you don't have people rebutting what you say. And they went right to him. Well, that was priceless advertising because they realized he was a draw. And you have to realize that, media is looking for people to click on them or to watch their news, and it's a tough business and they need to drive that. So it is in their interest to create this divide a lot of the time.
Okay, so the next question that we have is just what reservations do you have about the candidate that your party nominated to be, or the presidential candidate that your party nominated?
You sure you don't want to go first, Michael?
I mean, you set the rules, so I'll just follow your lead, Governor.
I think, I mean, again, and I'll say this, and I'm sure people listening on this call, even Republicans are all over the board on President Trump. I have had reservations from the beginning, and I think around 2 or 3 things. Number one, I do think President Trump has worked to divide often instead of to bring together, and that's a concern of mine. I'm concerned that he too often, I think some of the things that I think are really important, he's expressed in terms of being a Republican, he really hasn't expressed concern about the debt level and the deficit spending that has happened, and some of the progress. He's basically said, you know, people like them, so I'm okay with them without a concern for what's the impact for that 20 years down the road. And I think the other thing I'd say is he's too often, I think, been a little loose with the facts when I think some accuracy would really matter. And, you know, I think from the very beginning on the challenges around COVID, a sober analysis of the threat we were facing would have served the country well.
So let me list a few things. Joe Biden historically has had an interesting record on the issue of abortion. He was a pro-life Catholic at the beginning of his career, and even as late as his 2007 book, he wrote about the fact that he was proudly a middle-of-the-road guy on abortion who folks on the left of the party were mad at him. Folks who were sort of rock solid pro-lifers would get upset with him. But he even wrote in his book, you know, I've opposed federal funding for abortion because in the same way that I don't think I should impose, and this is him talking, Biden writes in the book something like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but just in the same way that I want to impose my Catholic pro-life view on the public, I think federal funding of abortion imposes a pro-choice view on the public, and I disagree with parts of that. I'm a pro-life person, but his respect for Hyde, his long-term support for late-term abortion bans has been good. During the primary, he flipped on Hyde, which I spoke out against publicly, and he has not been as ready to reaffirm his opposition to late-term abortion as I would want, and as I have advocated for him to, and as I will continue to advocate for him to be. And so that's a concern. I could say more about that, but I'll stick to pure criticism here. Joe Biden is I think the Democratic Party in general right now is able to express a critique of religious freedom, and I think we'll talk about this more a little bit later on, but doesn't seem to be able to articulate a positive vision for religious freedom. Joe Biden is someone, because he's older, because of his sort of background, and because of some issues that we worked together on in the White House, I've seen him internally push on the left of the party on religious freedom issues. He hasn't done that during this campaign to the extent I would hope, and I have concerns about a Biden administration and how it will take on not the big sort of looming issues. It's more the regulatory issues and how they adjudicate these issues that are mostly decided, by mid-level staffers in the agencies. And then, I just say we're at a time now where the country is going to require in my view, a really firm reset. And hard truths are going to have to be told, and I think it's going to take. I think Biden has the potential to tell some of those hard truths. It's going to take a level of persistence and a level of constantly confronting elements in both political parties, you know, I'm looking to see, especially in his first 100 days, if he wins this election, the extent to which he'll do that.
All right, so our final question for both of you is, what is one hard question you would like to ask the other about politics? And as a follow-up to that, what is one thing you would change about your party?
Yeah, I think I would, Democratic Party would not have repealing the Hyde Amendment in its platform. Yeah, I think that's, it would be a more pro-life party. I mean, I think the part of the difficulty there is that we do have a country where the majority, now there's a question as to whether they know what Roe v. Wade is, but it's clear a sizable percentage of the country wants abortion to be legal. And so there's just a question of, it's hard to imagine both parties being pro-life, because then you have a huge section of the country that's unrepresented in that way. But this is kind of a magic wand question, so I'll say a pro-life Democratic Party. My question for you, Bill, would be you have a complex, you had a complex state politically to lead. And I think on the outside, folks often think, you know, you're a political leader, you should just tell it how it is all the time and just sort of the unvarnished truth and challenge everything. But as a leader, you know that if you do that, then you're not able to get anything done. No one wants to be in coalition with you because they're always thinking that you're going to stab them in the back. So how do you think about selecting those moments where you think you have, where you think something needs to be challenged? And then in other opportunities, you know, deciding that, hey, something that's going on is not right, but I'm on a mission here, and if I chase every sort of shiny object, I'm never going to get the work that the people have called me to do. How do you deal with that tension?
Yeah, really great question. It really, the thing I can't emphasize enough when you're in office is the opportunities are almost endless, and the challenges are endless. And everybody thinks the thing that they care about, you should make a priority. But if you do, you end up chasing rabbits all over the woods and you don't get anything done. So I think that, Michael, my answer to your question would be, there have been a few big things. I mean, I decided we wanted to have a, you know, see if we come up with a program with 2 years free of community college for everybody in the state. I personally thought we should change, you know, when the whole expanding Obamacare, Affordable Care Act came up, I thought, I didn't really like exactly the plan they'd come up with, but I thought there was a way to tweak it and make it better. So I stuck my neck out and kind of went against my group on that. I also thought getting the state's budget in great shape was really important, because I knew at some point in time, I mean, I was in office in good times, but I knew at some point in times those would end. And, you know, we're seeing the impact of that now. So I think it was choosing, like, what are the things you think will really make a difference, and focusing on those things is critical. It is, Michael's makes a great point about there are always going to be things that you would like to do, but you can't. And I walked out the door thinking, boy, I learned a lot about criminal justice that I wish I'd taken up earlier, but I didn't A, have the time, and B, I just didn't realize how much difference we could make if we you know, worked on that.
Yeah.
But see, I think a couple things. I guess Sam, repeat the second part of the question, and then I'll. See, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah. One thing you would change about your party, and one question you would like to ask the other about politics.
Yeah. So one thing I'd change about my party, I think we're at the wrong place on the whole immigration debate. And it's interesting if you think about it. 1980, President Reagan announced he was running for president, do you know where he announced? He announced at the foot of the Statue of Liberty. And his point was, we're a great country that people want to come to. Let's preserve those things that have made us great, but keep welcoming in people. You know, obviously President Trump has taken a very different approach to that. I just from a purely spiritual point of view, I think it's hard to justify at least the perception of where we've been as a party. I'm not for open borders. I want to be really clear, but there are processes in place, or can be, that would have a thoughtful process about welcoming people, particularly from people who are coming out of persecuted situations. I don't think we as a party have ended up in the right place there. I guess a question I'd ask for you, Michael, and this would be one, you mentioned you wish the Democrat Party was in a different place on the Hyde Amendment. There'd be a lot of Christians who would say, boy, that issue is such a big one. I just can't go there in terms of voting for a non-pro-life president. So if you were sitting, having dinner with a friend or a glass of wine or whatever, and they were saying, I just can't, the pro-life deal is a hurdle I can't jump. What would you say?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is I respect if that's a hurdle that you just can't get over. I think we have too much sort of religious manipulation and sort of moral bullying in our politics. And I think that we have to give space for other Christians and other Americans to, yes, they can be challenged. Yes, we can ask people to consider the full sort of array of policy issues that impact the vulnerable, the poor, etc. But I want to make room for that to be okay. But then I'd also say, a few things. I think this issue itself has been used by politicians to bully folks into supporting them and overlooking a broader slate of issues. That would be the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say is that a lot of big promises get made during elections that don't tend to carry themselves out. When Barack Obama was running in 2008, the same people who were saying that Joe Biden is the most pro-abortion candidate now were saying it then, and they were saying it for every Democrat that ran every 4 years before that. When I was in the White House, I spent my 3.5 years there working with pro-life and pro-choice groups to try and find common ground on this issue. We saw by the time President Obama left office, the abortion rate in America had dropped to its lowest level since Roe v. Wade, a historic low. And so we see that this issue is just a lot more complicated than quote unquote having a pro-life administration in the White House. Overturning Roe v. Wade would send all of this back to the states. Issues like maternal health care, issues like ending pregnancy discrimination, issues like early childhood support, all of these things contribute to the reasons why a woman would have an abortion. And so it's just it's a big issue. And then, I'd say in this election, let me say this. There were candidates in the Democratic primary that I would have had a difficult time voting for, and that I would not, I would be much more hesitant making a more positive case for them. What I believe about Biden, and I know we're not getting into sort of partisan politics, but I will say this. Biden is someone who throughout his public life has expressed serious moral hesitation and tension about abortion. This is not someone who has quote unquote celebrated abortion. This is not someone who views this issue as sort of an issue to be antagonistic on. There were actually several moments in the presidential debates where that softball was sort of tossed out, and it's maybe I'll be proven wrong on this. Maybe he'll change. He is not someone who likes to use this as an issue to divide people. when, I'll say, looking at Hillary Clinton's debate, her debate answer on abortion, I think that's why she lost the election. And it's because she was using it in a divisive way, in my view. Again, there were candidates in the Democratic primary who tried to run by trying to turn up Democratic sort of support by constantly bashing pro-lifers. So that's, if we were talking about this election, I'd say during an Obama-Biden administration, the abortion rate went down. I'd say Biden clearly disagrees with us on legality of abortion, but he is not someone who's antagonistic towards our views on the subject. He's not someone who's going to morally berate us for our pro-life position. And in a political moment where we have a lot of berating on both sides of the aisle, that's something to value.
Okay, so we're going to shift a little bit to the more direct questions. And the first question is for you, Governor Haslam, if that's okay. Okay, so the question that we have is, do you think that our current president is truly aligned with the evangelical community, or do you believe that he just says what he needs to get votes?
It's a great question, and ultimately, I don't know that any of us can answer for someone else's heart. So I don't know that, but I will say this. I've been disappointed in the evangelical community's reaction to the whole question of character. Back during the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky scandal, evangelicals were the most likely to say that character mattered in a president. Today, we're down like 20 points. Evangelicals are down like 20 points in saying that character matters. And I think some of that goes back to what Michael was talking about earlier, that we're letting our politics determine our faith position instead of the other way around. And again, I can't comment ultimately on what's real and what's not. Vice President Pence I know very well, and I honestly think he's legitimately, coming from a true position of faith and a desire to serve God. I just don't know President Trump well enough to say that. But I am, like I said, my concern would be more for how the evangelical community has reacted in terms of what we say is important. And I think that's the bigger lesson for all of us on the call, whether you're right or left, is Michael had a great phrase, and I forgot what it just was, but when you get to that point where you're letting what you believe politically determine what you believe theologically, that's a problem. And the church is in a bad spot then.
All right, so the next question is for you, Mr. Ware. So some believe that the Democratic Party has been accused of being hostile towards religious beliefs that don't always align with liberal values. And you touched on this earlier, but how can the Democratic Party be more hospitable to people of faith?
Yeah, well, since I tackled pieces of this earlier, I'll just say a few related things, which is I do think a big piece of it is being very explicit about welcoming people of deep religious conviction into the party, into your campaign. I do think what we're seeing in this election cycle is much improved over 2016, where I was pretty public in saying that I think the Democratic Party, and particularly our nominee in 2016, ignored religious voters and thought that they could win just without without inviting religious people, broad swaths of the faith community, into their campaign in a way that they do for so many other sportsmen, veterans, all kinds of other kinds of communities and affinity groups and backgrounds. So the invitation is important. Another thing, I think it's really important that we don't put God in a box that he hasn't put himself in. So it's really important that we don't use this is not critique of the question. I completely get. This is just a general response to the question, which is, it's important that we don't use sort of religious values as a euphemism for a couple issues, like, and so, when you talk about, when we talk about religious values, well, the issue of immigration that Governor Haslam just talked about, that there are theological values that ought to influence and be a part of the conversation there. Or for those of us who believe that God has called us to steward creation, steward the environment. Well, that's a theological, that's a religious value, and we got to talk about which politicians and which parties are hospitable there. When we talk about welcoming and being providing asylum for persecuted folks, well, there's something there. When we talk about taking care of the poor, there's something there. So all that to say, yes, let's have a conversation about which parties are hospitable to religious values, but let's also talk about which religious values are we talking about, which religious communities are we talking about, and that'll just be a healthier conversation in which Christians are able to lead and dictate the terms of the conversation, as opposed to having politicians and political parties impose their categories on us, and then we operate within those confines.
Okay, so the next question, it's for you, Mr. Ware. Pardon me. In this moment of racial reckoning in our country, what vision for real and even like unprecedented progress towards racial justice can the Democratic Party hold out for? And then also, with a Christian tie-in, if you have any scripture that you think we should be keeping in mind to get us towards real progress, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. So, right, speaking generally, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, these are big parties. So this is all general. It's very hard to talk about, the difference between Senator Tim Scott and Senator John Kennedy is vast. The difference between Senator Chris Coons, who's a friend of the Democratic Party, and Senator Ed Markey is pretty significant. And so just generally speaking, I think the general promise of the Democratic Party on these issues is, the most sort of basic is racial reconciliation, pursuit of racial justice isn't going to be led by a party that doesn't include Black and brown folks to a large degree, and particularly African Americans. The Republican Party generally gets about 30-35% of the Hispanic vote. They generally get about less than 10% of the Black. So just as a major, as a demographic issue, it's hard to see how that works. Second, I'd say Democratic Party is a party that is not, according to courts in some states, intentionally trying to suppress and restrict voting rights of Black voters specifically. The Democratic Party is generally recognizes and is able to name systemic racism and racial disparities that need to be addressed head on, not through sort of just general policy making. And so, the promise is that we could implement direct policy instruments that would alleviate the vast disparities in income and access to housing, access to employment that are a result of past and present discrimination, and that we might get to a place where everyone has equal opportunity, and where your ability to succeed in life isn't based on the zip code that you're born in. And so I mean, just to be clear, I don't think the Democratic Party is perfect on this issue. And if you name some specific people, I could probably lay out some real serious critiques. But this is one of the core reasons why I'm a Democrat. I became a Christian through the Black church, in part because I liked soul music, and it was through soul music that I was introduced to gospel music, and it was through gospel music I was introduced to the gospel. and it was through the gospel that I was introduced to civil rights. And so it's a reason why I'm a Democrat, and I think that holds. I guess the last thing I'd say here is that in the wake of, there have been Republican leaders, even modern Republican leaders, who I think have been very good on these issues and have taken some bold stands. And then I'd also say it's going to take both parties. I mean, it's just so critical. In the same way that's hard to imagine sort of the country moving towards racial equity and racial justice through a Republican Party because of its composition, it's also very difficult to imagine the Democratic Party by itself. Like, we live together, and this has to be solved together. And so one of the things I'd like to see is for us to, yes, we're going to have real policy disagreements, but we can't let race become just another culture. It can't just become the next abortion. It can't just become the next immigration. We need to be able to transcend some partisan boundaries here.
All right, and as a follow-up to that, this is for you, Governor Haslam. What vision do you believe Republicans have for progressing towards racial justice in America?
First of all, I think Michael's point, when you talk about parties, you're talking about really big things and people in all different spots. But having said that, my vision would be that we go back and reclaim the heritage of Abraham Lincoln and the folks who were there kind of at the beginning of what became the modern Republican Party. And I think there's some really practical ways we can do that. I think some of the Republican ideas on education in terms of, back to the George Bush idea of No Child Left Behind ended up having some problems in its implication, but it's fundamental idea that we're not going to say that some kids in some zip codes can't learn. That was a great big step forward. And I think the chance for choice in education is a piece of that. On the economic front, I think Republicans understand this idea that jobs get created when people put capital at risk, that ultimately government can't really create jobs. We can take money from people and put it some other places, but wealth and jobs have been created in this country when people put capital at risk, and Republicans have, I think, historically understood that. And because of that, not just Republicans, but by and large, we have an economy that's, moved more people out of poverty, than you've historically seen. That being said, I would come back to what I would say this is, I don't think we're doing a good job as a party there. I mean, we're not conveying the truth to people of color that not just you're welcome, but that you're wanted here. And that's a mistake spiritually if you believe that all are created in the image of God. It's also a mistake politically, by the way. The country is rapidly becoming a country of where the old majority is going to become the minority. And if you want to put that in stark terms, 1 out of every 20 K through 12 student in the country is a Hispanic kid in Texas in school. Okay, 5% of all the K-12 students all across the country are Hispanic students in Texas. Well, we're probably not doing a really good job of effectively communicating to that 11th grader why they should vote Republican when they turn 18.
Okay, so this is our first question for the audience. Depending on time, we may or may not have time for others. But the question is, what role do you think churches ought to be playing in this political moment? How do we discern when the church ought to speak out, or at least have a conversation about a political or policy issue, whether it's abortion, immigration, marriage, or healthcare?
Mike, you want to go first, or either way?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think this is another place where there are no hard and fast rules. There are some churches where, because of denomination or culture, where talking about politics is not a shock to anybody, and it's a part of the tradition. I wouldn't suggest sort of immediately modeling, if you're a pastor, immediately modeling sort of your church on that tradition if that's not your own tradition. You could acknowledge some benefits there, or if you're if you're a church that has dealt with politics quite often, but you think you need to rein it back. I want to go cold turkey all of a sudden. So I think understanding your place and your tradition is important. Beyond that, a few things I ask pastors to think about. Pastors are increasingly getting pressure from their congregants to speak to events of the day. And I try and remind pastors that it is very rare that your congregants are reaching out to you to speak on an issue because they want to know what you think and want to follow your lead. Often when your congregants are asking you to speak on an issue, it's because they want you to say what they think, and they want to have that pastoral authority then that they could use against their buddy on the other end of the pew of the aisle who doesn't agree with their opinion. And so we really need to be careful about how pastoral authority is interjected into temporal political debates. That being said, there are moments where, and issues that are not sort of the outside coming sort of where you have to really stretch to try and make the political seem relevant. I'll give you a quick example. So my church in Arlington, Virginia, we have restoration legal aid services. And we have volunteers who are lawyers and volunteers who do accountant work and volunteers who are social workers who contribute to this program. There are a couple paid staffers that our church pays for that help immigrants process documents and get situated, that kind of thing. Well, when DACA was repealed, deferred action, it wasn't a political choice for my pastor. Do I want to get involved in a political debate here by mentioning this during the service? He was praying over the volunteers in our church who had been volunteering 14, 16-hour days because politics had entered into the life of our church in a new and pressing way. And so all that to say, there are going to be attentive to the church that you're serving, the church that you're a part of. You asked me for a Bible verse on the last question, and I felt like I was going over it. I'll just quickly mention it here. And it's become really important to me in how I think about sort of public life. In Galatians, Paul is writing to essentially a polarized community. You read like the opening chapters of Galatians, and he's like, you've had these false teachers, you guys can't agree on anything, you're tearing apart at the seams. I mean, it's a polarized community. And he advises them not to like figure out some power sharing agreement or to like split the difference. He tells them, bear another's burdens. And in this way, people will know the love of Christ is in you. We need to figure out how to bear one another's burdens, the burdens of our fellow brothers and sisters, the burdens of non-Christians that we're in community with, how we bear their burdens into public life, into politics, in a way that's sacrificial, in a way that isn't self-centered.
Yeah, and here's what I'd add to that. I think the hard question there is not what we get involved with, but how. And the point I would make that as Christians, you know, where you go to church, there's probably, I bet there's a student ministries group. Well, they're not teaching you, you know, how to make all A's. They're teaching you how to act as a believer in the educational environment you're in now. And I think what I would love to see churches do is realize where people of faith have messed up is we haven't acted on what we know to be true, and that's this. We know that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, okay? We know if that's true about us, then we know we could be wrong in whatever our view is of that topic, okay? My political mentor was a guy named Howard Baker. He was United States Senator, Majority Leader, Chief of Staff to Ronald Reagan, Ambassador to Japan. He was from a small country town, and he had a saying that it went, always remember the other fella might be right. Okay, as believers, we should be the people that are exhibiting that all the time. And here's the other thing I'd add is this. This is all, being in public office, and I think Michael would agree, is way more complex than it looks from the outside. I was at dinner one night at the White House. It was President Obama's last year. It's like this formal dinner with all the governors and all the cabinet there. And I'm sitting next, I won't say who it is, but a long-time Obama staffer, deep loyalist, okay, big-time Democrat. And I said, what do you know now you wish you'd known 8 years ago? He said, I wish I'd known how hard all this is. He said, I wouldn't have been so hard on George W. Bush. He said, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with him. I thought he was wrong on the war, but I didn't know how complex all these issues are. As believers, we should enter in with humility and with a sense of grace. And when I think about how should the church engage, what are the issues? The issues are sometimes hard to figure. I mean, Jesus tells us to feed the poor, but he doesn't tell us how. But we know we're supposed to feed the poor, and we know we're supposed to do it with humility and grace.
Exactly right. Yeah.
All right, so it looks like we've got time for one last quick question. So materialism, like profit, power, ratings, media click, etc., seem to drive much of our political and institutional movements. So as Christians, how do we counter these base motives in a way that has substantial impact on society?
I'll go first here. I think it's this. You have to be willing to go against the grain and against your tribe at times. And sometimes that might mean disagreeing with your base. Michael has done that on as you just said, on the abortion issue. I did that on the Affordable Care Act and expanding. But there's times when you have to say, I know this doesn't make sense. Howard Baker, I just talked about when he was senator, Jimmy Carter proposed, selling the Panama Canal to Panama. Who knew that we owned the Panama Canal? We don't even know who owns it today, but at the time it was a big issue, and he voted to do it. It ended up costing him the chance to be president in 1980. But he just thought it was the right thing to do. And so there are going to be times when, as a believer, there are going to be people on the left who think you're a wacko righty, and there's people on the right that think you've gone way left. I just think there's going to be times the gospel calls us to places that our party doesn't want us to go.
Yeah, and I just add, and this is something that's hard for folks in elected office to sometimes say, because it can sound like a cop-out, and it's anything but. So I'll say it, which is, at the end of the day, the state of our politics is a reflection of the state of our souls, our voters. It's so easy to talk about, those knuckleheads in the Beltway, or the state capitol. They are largely responding. This isn't total, this isn't complete. They are largely responding to the incentives and disincentives that we ourselves put into the system. So if you want to understand, if you want to sort of untangle the ways in which materialism, greed, self-interest sort of infect and drive so much of our politics, the real test of that is not in the opportunities you see to call others to be sacrificial. It's how do you respond when a policy decision is made that affects you and your interests, but that you can look outside of that and see, this is for the common good. I understand the argument that's being made here. One of the interesting ways this has worked out, there's been some interesting reporting, a George Packer article in the Atlantic and some other about liberal enclaves, progressive enclaves in cities like New York and Boston, where straight blue, 90% blue neighborhoods. But when the progressive mayors of these cities or progressive school boards wanted to make the school districts so that they were more equitable, all of a sudden these straight blue ticket progressives all of a sudden had their arms thrown in the air, because now it was the policies directly affecting them. And I don't want my kids going to school with kids who aren't as smart as them, or might come from different cultures than them. And so that's what This isn't just about sort of what badge you put on, about what label you put on. The real test of this is what happens when it comes to you, and how do you respond, and can you keep your eye on the common good, even if it involves some sacrifice? And will you punish politicians who are willing to make courageous decisions that they know might be a net negative for you because they think it's a net positive for the community as a whole? That's really where the rubber hits the road here.
So I'm going to jump back in here, and we're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much to both of our panelists, and Samuel and Alyssa. Thank y'all. You did a great job with questions. Yeah, absolutely. Very proud of you. And actually, this is, I think one of my hopes in this is that, we've had 100 and something people listen here, and some of them are students. It's recorded, and some students will listen to it. I hope there are Trinity students who are going to go into politics, who are going to go into public service, and who will look at you guys and say, there's a mentor, there's someone I can follow. I'd like to learn more. You can easily learn more about these folks. You can look at Michael's website, and he's got lots of articles in the Atlantic and Christianity Today and Washington Post and other places, and involved in the AND campaign. Governor Haslam has a book coming out sometime in the next, don't want to scoop you here, but a book on being a Christian and politics, right? Yeah. So there are lots of chances to follow these folks, and thank you so much for your generous spirit and your willingness to talk to each other and to talk to us. I'm going to pray for us, and then we will close out the evening. Gracious God, thank you for this time together as a community, and thank you that you brought us these two men who love you and who have sought to love their neighbors well through political involvement. Lord, they don't always agree. We know they can't both be right at times, but we know that you are always right, and that your ways are righteous and true. Yes. And so we thank you that we follow you, Lord Jesus, and we look forward to that time when your kingdom comes, when we'll be able to align our political aspirations and all of our aspirations with your will and say, your will be done. And know that it will be. And Lord, while we wait for that, help us to be faithful. I pray for the students at Trinity that they would hear your call in their lives to serve you in whatever vocation you've got for them. Thank you that you created each of them in your image, and you have a plan for each of them. Go with us now and bless us. Lord, we pray for our nation leading into this election. We ask for our leaders that you would help them to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you. May your will be done. In Christ's name, amen.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Great evening. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a great night.
Great to be
Thanks,
with
Alyssa and Sam.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Michael.
Thank you.
See you.